And because this is a special program, we will jump right in. Please welcome David Haynes, co-lead for the Wisconsin Alliance for Civic Trust, who will introduce our program and our panel today. David?
Thanks, Raj, and good afternoon, everyone. We have a full Memorial Hall today for what I think is going to be a great program. Good afternoon, and thanks for being here. Before we get started, I'd like to recognize my colleague in this effort at the Wisconsin Alliance for Civic Trust, former Governor Scott McCallum. Scott, you can stand up. You know, Scott lives now in western Wisconsin, and he's kind of my weather guy, so I call him every morning and say, what's going on over there? What's coming my way? We've really enjoyed working with one another in this effort. WisACT, by the way, is a cross-partisan citizen group. Cross-partisan means Republicans and Democrats working together. We're focused on building trust in our democratic processes, particularly in elections and voting. Now, if you're interested, there are some cards at your table with a QR code. Scan it, go to our website, check us out, or you can go to wisact.org. I want to see, is Allison here? Allison Keeley, wait, raise your, Allison, stand up. This is Allison Keeley, our state coordinator. And Allison is a proud recent graduate of the University of Wisconsin. So one quick housekeeping note. We are going to save plenty of time at the end for your questions. We're going to do that in a little different way than we have in the past. Please write them down on the note cards at your table, and then we will come around and collect them and get them to our moderator. Now to our panel. I want to start with Kathy Bernier. Kathy was the Chippewa County Clerk for 12 years and served on her village board for 5. She ran for and won a seat in the State Assembly in 2010 and held that seat until she won a seat in the State Senate. She served one 4-year term and retired from the legislature in 2023. Since then, Kathy has really dedicated herself, and this is how I got to know her, by her work in educating the public statewide about how Wisconsin elections work. Next is Paulina Gutierrez. Paulina is the new executive director of the Milwaukee Elections Commission. That's the organization that manages elections for the city and ensures that voters in our city have all the information they need. She joined the commission in 2023 after several years with the State Department of Corrections, and before that, after holding a variety of positions in the city of Milwaukee. She is a member of the Harbor District and a graduate of both Alverno College and Marquette University. Paulina, welcome. And finally, Meagan Wolfe. Meagan is the administrator of the Wisconsin Elections Commission, serving as the state's chief elections official. Meagan was appointed by the bipartisan 6-member commission in February of 2018 and confirmed by the state Senate. She serves as an election security advocate and as an ambassador for the needs of Wisconsin's electoral system. So a big part of her job is ensuring that Wisconsin's 1,922 local election officials, that's right, 1,922, the most in the country, have the resources and technology they need to conduct elections. And finally, our moderator, Patrick Marley. Patrick's a good friend of mine and a former colleague. He covers voting issues for the Washington Post with an emphasis on the upper Midwest. Prior to that, he reported for the paper I used to work at, the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, about Wisconsin politics, redistricting, challenges to election laws, and the partisan disputes over the 2020 presidential election. He is co-author of a 2013 book called More Than They Bargained For, Scott Walker, Unions, and the Fight for Wisconsin. So Patrick and our panel, please come up. Thank you.
Well, thanks for having us. If you can't hear me at any point, please wave at me to make sure that you can hear everybody up here. I'm going to start out by just sort of asking you to talk about your roles. Wisconsin's a different state than most other states. Most states have a Secretary of State that oversees their elections. We have a Secretary of State, but she doesn't have any duties over the elections. So I wonder, Meagan, if you could talk about your job with the Wisconsin Elections Commission, what the commission is, how it all works.
Yeah.
It should be on already.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Meagan Wolfe. I'm the administrator of the Wisconsin Elections Commission, and as Patrick said, Wisconsin's chief election official. So how does Wisconsin run elections differently from other states, and what is the role of the administrator? So first of all, instead of having a single partisan elected official like they do in most other states, so about 40 states have a Secretary of State that runs elections for their states. Here in the state of Wisconsin, our law is that we have a bipartisan commission that oversees election administration. And how that commission is structured is there's 3 Republicans and 3 Democratic commissioners. And I'm not a commissioner. I don't have a vote on the commission. Whenever the commission wants to meet to decide whether or not they want to issue guidance to Wisconsin's 1,922 local election officials, they have to do so in a public meeting. And they actually have to get 4 out of the 6 commissioners, at least 4 out of the 6 commissioners have to vote for something in order for that to become guidance or what's put out to the clerks. And all that has to happen in a public meeting. And so I think that makes it a really unique model here in the state of Wisconsin, that all of those decisions around elections, they're made in a public meeting. And amazingly, they're made in a bipartisan way, right? Because we have 6 commissioners, 3 Republicans, 3 Democratic commissioners, and they have to have 4 votes. And so that means any vote of the commission is by its nature going to be bipartisan. It's often confused what my role is on the commission. My role is to implement the directives of the commission. I don't have a vote on the commission. And actually, the law requires me and my staff to be nonpartisan. And we take that incredibly seriously. And so a lot of times we'll hear, misinformation around myself or the commission staff saying that we implemented something or we made some type of decision. That's actually not at all true. It's the commission that makes the decisions, and myself and the staff that get to carry out then those directives and votes of the commission. Another way that we're really unique is that decentralized model. So most other states run elections at the county level. And so that means in states like Arizona, they might have 15 counties, which means 15 local election officials, and they probably have an elections department that runs elections in those 15 counties. Here in the state of Wisconsin, each city, town, and village runs elections for their communities. And many of these places are small towns with a very small population, and they may only employ their clerk for 5 hours a week. And they do more than just elections. They might do elections, licensing in their community, taxes, and other things. And so it makes the administration model of providing guidance, training, resources to our local election officials really different than in other states. But also, as I'm sure we'll talk about today, I think there's a lot of benefits to that decentralized nature because it means our local election officials have a real connection with their community in ways that you might not see in other states.
So, Paulina, talk about so as Meagan mentioned, the local, I think we're working on the audio. Paulina, can you talk a little bit about your role with the Milwaukee Election Commission, which does have a slightly different structure than most local governments? Tell us about how things are done in Milwaukee and your role in it.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay, sorry. Again, Paulina Gutierrez, Executive Director. So in the city of Milwaukee, we have the Milwaukee Election Commission. We're a staff of 11, and we are responsible solely for administering elections in the city of Milwaukee. So other jurisdictions may have it in their city clerk's office. In the city of Milwaukee, we have a specific agency just for administering elections. We also have a commission. 3 members that are appointed by the mayor. We have 2 Democrats and 1 Republican. And in their position, they certify election results, verify nomination signatures. So all of that work happens at our election commission. Additionally, we also administer elections for school board members as well.
And Kathy, you are a former state senator, former state representative, and a former county clerk. Can you briefly talk about the role that county clerks play in Wisconsin, because they don't have as prominent a role as they do in other states, and also the role of the legislature, and maybe talk a little bit about what your work with Keep Our Republic.
So as county clerk, we provide some help and assistance and guidance to the municipal clerks. We work hand in glove with them because the county clerk provides all of the electronic ballots and the programming for the electronic equipment and the printing of the ballots. So we have to work with the municipalities hand in glove in administering those elections. When I was county clerk, I created the Chippewa County Clerks Association. So we would meet every other month to educate and train each other on new and improved rules that were coming through that darn legislature. Help America Vote Act, I lived through it as a county clerk. That is the first time we had statewide voter registration. We had to, in most municipalities, the only municipalities that had voter registration were 5,000 and up, which were very few municipalities in the state of Wisconsin. So we had to put into the statewide voter registration system all of the electors for Chippewa County, and it took quite some time, but that is what provided us a statewide voter registration system that now has checks and balances. So when I worked for Keep Our Republic, my job was to educate the citizens of the state of Wisconsin, as many as possible, and through our media helpers and other organizations such as WisACT, we were able to partner to educate voters on the actual electoral system from beginning to end. The stars of the show were actually the municipal clerks and county clerks. The municipal clerks, county clerks, and the one and only election commission person were able to go and help educate the voters on what actually happens during the electoral process from beginning to end, from the preparation for an election, election day, and post-election activity. Because as you know, most people don't know what happens outside of them walking in, giving their photo ID, and casting their ballot. Most people don't know all the work and effort that's gone into it, and some of the misinformation and disinformation that has occurred since 2020 was driving me crazy. So I wanted people to know there were some issues, and I set those out. Here are some of the problems we had in 2020. However, there was a whole lot of things that didn't happen that people said did.
Okay, for this next one, I'm going to start with you, Paulina. We had a decision on Friday from the Wisconsin Supreme Court related to drop boxes. So in 2020, I'll just give a little preamble here. In 2020, drop boxes were widely used as mail voting increased considerably because of COVID. In 2022, the Wisconsin Supreme Court issued a ruling that said drop boxes were not allowed in the state, and so they were not in place for the midterm elections. And then on Friday, the court, with a different makeup, said they are in fact allowed, and local governments have the option of putting them into place. The mayor of Milwaukee has said he will have them. Tell us a little bit about how you're going to roll those out, and if there are challenges with communicating information to voters since they had them, they didn't have them, now they're going to have them again.
Sure, thank you. The decision came out down on Friday. When in 2022 the decision happened, we kept the drop boxes in the locations. We typically have 15, and we locate them in hubs of community, which is the libraries, for example, a great place to put them. And so they were locked and left there. So then a couple weeks before the decision was coming, we decided, let's go take a look and see how they're doing. We did a physical audit. We have 12 that are currently operational. And so now becomes the key job of administering elections is just constant planning, detail orientation, workflow, project management, staffing, training. So that's what we're doing now to move ahead. So we do have a special election on July 30th for State Senate District 4. They will not be in operation at that time, but we will have them, we're planning for August. We've done this before, and it's all about getting that workflow and that plan together so that we are ready for pickup and delivery and chain of custody and security. And yet, in terms of communication, that is always such a big challenge for us, and I'm sure for all clerks, because we have, again, for a first-class city, we have 11 staff full-time, and they all have very specific, important duties on administering elections. And so, as I'm sure many of the other city clerks, we depend heavily on our voting organizations and community groups to help us spread the word. And so obviously we will wait for the guidance that's coming down and then create that communications plan and reach out to our partners to make sure that we can get that message out and then develop those materials. And so, if you have an organization or a group, getting those community connectors, we certainly utilize every tool we can to get that word out.
Kathy, what are your impressions of this decision? And with local governments having full say on whether they'll have them or not, are you concerned at all that they might not be evenly distributed around the states, that some communities may have ready access to them and others may not use them at all?
That is correct. A legitimate concern is that equal access is a problem in regard to that. But as a legislator, a former legislator, I wrote laws to expressly state that this is how this thing shall happen. This is where you get a Wisconsin ID or a driver's license, through the Department of Motor Vehicles. Never wrote a law that said, but you can't get one from Amazon, and you can't get one from Target, and you can't get one from a street vendor. That is not how you write a law. So I have no problem with drop boxes. I'd prefer they be consistent throughout the state, but that you can't, because Milwaukee is much larger than Madison. Madison is much larger than La Crosse, and La Crosse is much larger than Ashland. You would not need 15 ballot drop boxes in Ashland. So it would be hard to make it consistent. But I think we should all be concerned that we are on a slippery slope in this state and this nation when the interpretation of the law is not an actual interpretation of the law. The law said you return your ballot by mail or you return it to the clerk. That is my interpretation. It's been my interpretation for years. I don't necessarily agree with this current interpretation. However, the Supreme Court is the Supreme Court. And so now I encourage the Wisconsin Election Commission to pass an emergency rule to make sure that all of the processes and procedures are in place. It's not as simple as a drop box, You have to know when to pick those up. Every drop box has to be notified that your ballot must not go into that box past 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. because it has to get to the central count location by 8 p.m. There are a lot of processes and procedures that need to be in place, and not for a Supreme Court to just say they're legal. There's a lot more to it than that. I'm pretty emotional about this, by the way.
So that sets up my question for Meagan perfectly. What do you see as the role for the Elections Commission? Will it be issuing guidance or administrative rules to the local governments? What is the proper level of monitoring? I think in some places in the past, not just in Wisconsin, but elsewhere, they might not have been videotaped, and then there would be concerns or questions about when ballots were dropped off. By the same token, in some states like Arizona, you had very aggressive citizen monitoring of drop boxes that some viewed as intimidating. So what's the balance to be struck for that?
So first off, I do have some sort of breaking news, if you can call it that. The commission is going to meet on Thursday at 8 a.m., and the purpose of their meeting will be to discuss the priorities ruling. And as the commission does with anything, they'll be tasked with looking at what is available, what the options are that are available, and during that public meeting deciding what type of guidance do we want to provide to our local election officials. So my role right now will be to research things, to prepare information for them so that they're able to have that discussion and consider those options. I don't think that it'll be as simple as just simply referring back to the guidance that was previously out there on drop boxes. I think probably things have changed in the last couple of years. And so we'll have to look to, are there other best practices, information available out there for clerks so that they know how to make sure that Dropbox options that they select are secure options and take into account sort of some of the current considerations. But the commission will be meeting on Thursday, and they will be deciding what path to take in terms of issuing guidance to those local election officials. Sometimes they will issue a memo, a clerk communication that lays out some of the FAQs or other information for the clerks. Sometimes they'll pursue an administrative rule. There's various options that are available to them, and so they'll make those decisions and deliberations. I can say for certain, though, too, that this time around, I want to be very, very sure that people understand that it's the commission meeting to make these decisions. That's always been the case, but I think with the last round of Dropbox decisions, we saw a lot of misinformation where people were attributing that decision to me or to commission staff. And so I think, continuing to make it very, very clear that the commission's meeting, they're going to have these discussions, that the public can offer input to the commission as part of their deliberations is going to be especially important as we head into this election season.
Indeed, there has been a little bit of misinformation about elections over the last few years you may have come across from time to time. So Kathy, I want to ask you about that. You, in 2020, were very critical of some of the false claims that were made about elections and called them out. At the same time, you were also critical of some election practices that were used in 2020. I guess as a baseline, why do you feel that people should be able to trust elections? What should give them confidence in the results in this state? And what do you see as something that can be done to build confidence so it's even greater?
So the bottom line, my staff and I did some research and data about how the election was administered and some research on our own. However, we kept our powder dry and waited for the Wisconsin Legislative Audit Bureau to finish their audit. We asked them to audit it, we meaning the legislature. In addition, I want to just do a shout out, as I do almost in every training session, to the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty. Did this an exhaustive study with 24 researchers and statisticians to evaluate the electoral process in Wisconsin. They suggested, as well as the Legislative Audit Bureau suggested, there is room for improvement. Should there be a third-party person hired by the mayor of Green Bay to come in and do whatever they did? No. The clerks are the legal responsible parties to run elections, and those are the individuals by statute who are supposed to be administering elections. So there were errors, and there were issues, and there were problems, but there was also COVID. And COVID caused a lot of those issues that we are not going to repeat. Pray for that. However, I think it was time to call it a day, and this constant drumbeat by Michael Gableman and all of that was way over the top, and I just had to say so. Donald Trump lost by 51,000 more votes than what our Republican congressional candidates received, which is a pretty good indicator that people either didn't vote for president or went down ballot and voted Democrat and then went down ballot. Most of that information is provided by the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty. And to carry this argument or this disinformation, misinformation for 3 solid years is just a bit too much when you've got all the evidence in front of you pointing to the majority of the election worked quite well.
One of the issues where misinformation has flowed, Megan, is regarding the way results come in Wisconsin. We have absentee counts that in places like Milwaukee are some of the last to come in, and that can change, how the results are trending through the night. Can you just walk us through a little bit about how that process works and what voters should expect as they're watching returns?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I find that, when I go out and talk to people about how elections work, something that always seems really surprising to people is that here in the state of Wisconsin, all ballots must be received by 8 p.m. on election night to be counted. We don't have any sort of late return. And so, another piece of our story on election night is the law also says that the clerks, they can't start processing absentee ballots until the polls open on election day, right? And so that means that every single absentee ballot that's sent to a local jurisdiction, it has to be sent to the person's polling place or their central count facility and actually opened as part of the public process. So when your absentee ballot is sent back, it goes to your polling place or your central count facility where they have to announce your name. They have to announce your address. It's open to the challenge processes that exist. And so it's very much a public process that's part of election day, and they have a really short window of time in order to accomplish that. I know that there's a lot of claims that ballots come in for a week after the election or other things. That's just simply not true. There is no late return for absentee ballots. Another part of the certification process is we have a process called Canvass. And what Canvass is it means that at the municipal level, at the county level, and at the state level, there is a public accounting for all of the numbers and artifacts of the election. So for example, during the municipal board of canvass, which is again a publicly observable process, they're actually going through all of the poll books to make sure that they have the same number of signatures in their poll book as they have voters that cast a ballot. They're going to make sure that they have the right number of voter registrations compared to the number of participations they had. They're also going to make sure that they have the right number of absentee ballot requests to match up with the number of absentee ballots that were counted. Once all of that's certified at the municipal level, it then goes to the county. The county's going to do those same types of checks again. They're going to make sure that all the numbers make sense. If they don't, they're going to send that back down to the municipal level for them to reopen their canvas to examine it again. Once all 72 counties have submitted their results, it then comes to the state. We're going to do the same thing over again. We're going to make sure that a municipality hasn't submitted more participation than they have registered voters. We're going to make sure they don't submit more absentee ballots as part of their totals than they had requests for absentee ballots. All of those numbers are checked. And if we find any sort of issue, we're going to send it back down to the local government to reopen their canvas in public to figure out what happened. And so it's a really long process to not only count the absentees on election night, but then to make sure that all the numbers are right. And so that takes a while. But the actual counting of the ballots, that has to happen on election day. Another thing here in the state of Wisconsin is once they start counting their absentee ballots, they can't adjourn and start up the next day. So in other states, you might hear about how they had a week to count their absentee ballots and they're able to adjourn and come back the next day. That's actually not the case here in the state of Wisconsin. Once they start counting the absentee ballots, they have to keep counting until they're completed. And so that means that we really do get our results a lot quicker than most other states. But that being said, the places that have the most ballots are going to take the longest to count them. And I know there's been a lot of efficiencies that have been expanded in our larger jurisdictions to help process absentees in a timely manner, given that we have so many more now. But, I had a question at one of the events I did with Kathy a few months ago where somebody asked me, why does it take longer for Milwaukee to count their absentees than any other jurisdiction? And I said, well, because they have more absentee ballots than any other jurisdiction. If you had more apples than your neighbor and you both had to count your apples, the person with more apples is going to take longer to count them. And so, it's there's a lot of misinformation around sort of the processes for counting absentees. But here in the state of Wisconsin, if you're hearing those things, just remember that all ballots have to be returned by 8 p.m. on election night to be counted. And once we start counting, we can't adjourn until the counting is finished. And that there are 3 layers of checks of canvass to make sure that the results are right before they're finalized and certified.
Thank you. I'm going to check with Dave. Do we have?
Just a reminder to do questions.
Yeah. Oh, yes. If you have questions, please fill them out. Give them to Dave. Dave will be walking around. Mary will be walking around. You can submit their questions to them, and they will bring them up. Paulina, I'm going to turn to you on this issue of misinformation. We've been talking about how much misinformation there has been. There's now the advent of AI, which we don't know how that could be deployed. When you're in that kind of environment, how do you prepare for that situation? What are your greatest concerns about the way misinformation could travel this fall?
Thank you. I just wanted to add to the part that Meagan added or spoke about on Central Count. First of all, I love Central Count. It is an amazing experience to watch bipartisan Democrats and Republicans working together. Every ballot is counted with 2 different parties and processed accurately, and our machines are tested, and we track everything. And it is probably one of the most amazing experiences to see democracy in action. And I encourage, if you want to come and observe, remember here, safe, secure, and transparent elections is what we administer in Milwaukee. So it's one of my favorite things to do. So back to dealing with enhancements in communication and technology that increase miscommunication, misinformation, and malinformation, correct? Yes, thank you. So one of the challenges we face, as I've mentioned, and I'm sure I've repeated it to you multiple times, we are a first-class city. We count the most ballots, but we have a small and dedicated staff of 11 that do this day in and day out. And so sometimes the challenge we face is how do we navigate other things that are outside of our control? Part of that is all about planning and partnerships. And so a lot of it is engaging with our law enforcement partners, local, state, and federally. And I'm happy to report that many of them have reached out. It's also all hands on deck. So with Mayor Johnson at the helm, encouraging others, so all of our agency heads and leaders, a lot of our city employees, public servants, participate in the election administration process, especially on a general. And so we do the best we can to provide information. One of the things we've learned is the information that comes from the Milwaukee Election Commission. We have the facts and truth behind us. And so we're here to break it down into basic details. We're answering phone calls every day, and we do the best to disseminate that information. And again, as I mentioned before, depending on our voting advocacy organizations, so that I always encourage groups that if you want to get out there and help get the vote out, please share your information with us so that we can make sure that it's correct. I think the other thing that I've learned a lot about is election workers are an amazing and tight-knit family, especially having experienced 2020. So many, when I came into this position, so many local, state, and others reached out and have been calling, and they're a phone call away. And so we all work together to try to navigate these things. And many of these national organizations are providing trainings and webinars to help us get ready and help us understand information. So we do the best that we can to provide factual information to the public, and happy to answer any questions we can. It is a challenge, but for us, our priority is administering secure, transparent, and fair elections.
Thanks. I want to talk a little bit about poll workers and poll observers. You mentioned Milwaukee has a staff of 11. Of course, there's way more people that end up working the election for the early voting period and election day because you've got to staff all those polling locations. Kathy, can you talk, the political parties actually have a role in recruiting poll workers. Talk to us about that system, whether you think it's good or bad to have political parties involved. Yeah, that'd be great.
Well, I would like to point out that in this day and age, almost everyone has a political preference. So to find all 100% independents to work the polls is not possible. I think Republicans, in my opinion, and observing from my participation in the Republican Party, they did not push very hard to get lists to the municipal clerks. So Meagan can go through the details of what the law says and all of that, but the bottom line is the Democratic parties and the Republican parties must provide lists to the municipal clerks by a certain time. And yes, they can add people to that list at a later date. I found out from one of our meetings, one of our community engagement programs. It is good to be open and transparent at all times. Never act like you have something to hide, whether you are a poll worker or a municipal clerk or whatever. Be fully transparent. If you have to empty the ballot box because it's full, then you announce that to everyone exactly what you're doing, and you search out a Republican and a Democrat to help with the process. That is what provides the integrity and the openness and the confidence in the electoral system that everyone should have. And I think the Republicans fell down on the job on not doing their due diligence to help those municipal clerks and running those polling places and helping with the system. As a matter of fact, in West Bend, we had a Republican stand up and speak, and he said, I questioned the electoral process after 2020. I believed much of what was being said. I volunteered to work the polls. I was trained. I now work the polls, and I now believe we have an excellent system with all the checks and balances in place that we need. So that is the best way to convince somebody that we have a good electoral system, is by making a part of that.
Okay, thank you for that. In addition to the poll workers, there are poll observers. So the poll workers that paid city staff or town staff who help process the ballots. Poll observer are people who want to see how the system works. Meagan, can you talk to us a little bit about that? There was a recent special election, and in Glendale, some observers were removed. Can you talk about what the role of observers are and how election officials make sure they can see everything that they're supposed to see and don't interfere with voting?
Yeah, thanks. So there's actually recently been a lot of work done on the observer process. So observers are a really important part of election day and of the election process, the days around the election. Here in Wisconsin, anyone can observe an election in any jurisdiction. So in other states, you might see where you have to be affiliated with a party, or they only allow certain numbers to attend, or there's residency requirements. Here, anybody can observe at any polling place. And so I often encourage people that are from other parts of the state that might be skeptical about, some of our larger cities or other places and how they run elections. Go watch for yourself. You don't have to take our word for it. You can actually go be an observer in Green Bay or Milwaukee or Madison or wherever you'd like to. But the commission has recently undertook the process of promulgating an administrative rule. And if you all, are looking for a nap, I could explain the administrative rule process to you in detail. But I think the important takeaways of what happened with that process is the commission actually formed an advisory committee to work on that administrative rule. And they brought in people from all the spectrum of the political spectrum to weigh in on that administrative rule. And so we had, probably more than 25 people representing different groups, and like I said, from the entire political spectrum, that worked through every detail of the administrative rule. What would work for people in terms of balancing that access for observers and the security of the poll workers, or the confidence of the electors, and making sure that they don't feel like their process is being interfered with. And it took over a year of having these meetings and going through the fine points of the administrative rule, but we now have a new emergency rule. And that rule goes through some of the more specifics about what is an observer able to see, where can they stand, what level of information are they able to access. And I think this is really going to go a long way to helping us all have the tools we need to make sure that the observers are able to interact in a way that's lawful, and that the poll workers feel like they have something to go back to draw from, to make sure that they are administering their polling place in a way that's good for everyone. And so I encourage people to take a look at that administrative rule. A lot of work went into it. The law just gives us that basically observers can be at the polls and they can be 3 to 8 feet from the voting process. That's what the law says. It doesn't say what the observers can look at. It doesn't give you any detail about that. And so that's why the commission chose this process of an administrative rule, is to really give some detail to that process, which I think will help make for a better process for the poll workers and for the observers themselves. In terms of observers and conduct, I think for the most part, we see that observers come in and they have, they want to come watch the election process. And this is great. This is a healthy part of election day, is having people that have strong opinions about elections actually there, actually seeing for themselves. This is what we want as election officials, is people to be there and be engaged with the process. But if conduct does, sometimes this happens, it's rare, but sometimes it happens. But if conduct does become disruptive, where they're disrupting a voter's ability to be able to cast their ballot or the orderly conduct of the election, then the chief election inspector of that polling place can actually ask for that person to leave or be removed from the polling place. But we hope that that doesn't happen, and we hope these rules will help to establish what is appropriate behavior for everybody.
Thank you. Paulina, can you talk about the poll worker recruitment and how that's going? In 2020, a lot of local governments had a great deal of difficulty recruiting people because many of our poll workers were older and COVID made them think twice about working the polls. In fact, in some communities, the National Guard came in to help. How is that going this time? And regarding observers, do you the central count gets many close eyes on it? You and your colleagues get videotaped all the time of people taking photos of you. Do you feel like the observer process has worked well, that there's the right balance between transparency and non-interference of your performing your duties?
Sure, thank you. Poll workers. First of all, poll workers are an amazing group of people. Our chief inspectors are so dedicated to the process. The ability to multitask, de-escalate, administer fair and transparent elections is kind of a great thing. And, if you ask your community and your neighbors, you'll find out how many, I've worked the polls before. So I do have cards out on the table. If anyone is interested to be a poll worker, please just go on our website and sign up. It's a great experience. We do have a pretty big poll worker recruitment plan, i.e. that's why I'm encouraging you to apply. For the August and general election, we did receive a robust list from both parties, but we're always looking. We're feeling really confident right now. Again, we just kicked it off. We have a goal of recruiting 1,300 new poll workers. And so I don't have the stats or numbers now, but we are starting to gear up to the point where we've hired some temporary staff to help us answer phone calls from interested poll workers and those that are getting ready to work in August and November. And then, of course, we also have the delightful special election that we are already administering elections and hiring poll workers. In terms of observers, I'll never forget my first experience of dealing with observers. It can be a little intimidating at first, but if you take a moment just to explain the process and walk them through it, they get to understand it. And we have a great experience typically with most of our poll workers at Central Count. A lot of it is preparation, right? Having the lines designated so that there's no confusion about where people stand. What we have learned too is as Central Count starts, we have about 4 chiefs that work Central Count, and one of them is assigned to just talk to observers. And so we bring them in, give them a little pep talk, explain the process and expectations. We now provide them with a kind of a morning FAQ so that they know how many ballots we're expected to count and what's the status and some of the rules. And that has really helped to assuage any concerns or, maybe some attitude, I think, for sure. And then typically when we can, if, when we have time, if parties, want to do a tour or whatnot, we try to do that. Of course, we run elections all year long, but once we start hitting around this month till November, we're super busy, and so that becomes a little more difficult to be proactive during that time. But outside of the really busy election season, We are always engaging with our parties and interested groups to just provide more education where possible.
Thanks. We got a lot of great questions, so I'm going to try to move this into more of a speed round. And I'll just ask, we'll try to change up each person a question rather than having all three of you address each one. But one question we did here get about poll workers is, do you need volunteers for central count? I bet you're still taking people to work. So if people want to be involved, what do they need to do?
So I was silly and didn't bring the actual card in front of my desk or in front of my face here, so I can tell you. But there are cards out at the table. We have a new online system to hire staff. So it's called Poll Chief. You just go on our website, you apply. There's a little part where you can say you're interested in Central County, and we'll get through to you. I just know that we're getting a bunch of calls right now for August and November, and because we are in the midst of a special election, we haven't had an opportunity to respond. So if any of you have those calls and emails, we will be getting to you soon. But yeah, that's how we do it. Just you can apply online. It's a great and easy process.
And if you don't work in Milwaukee or you don't live in Milwaukee,
yes, thank you.
You can go to your local government. They probably need help too. And Meagan, am I right?
Or go to myvote.wi.gov, and there's actually you can find your municipal clerk, and you can also even say if you want to be a poll worker, and then an email will go to your municipal clerk.
And I should clarify, for Central Count, you have to be a City of Milwaukee resident. Polling locations, you can be a county resident.
Okay, this is one of those questions about ballot harvesting. Kathy, can you tell us what the question is? What can be done to eliminate ballot harvesting? Talk to people about explain what ballot harvesting is and whether it's legal and
ballot harvesting is essentially someone who goes around and registers somebody to vote, gets them to request an absentee ballot. They request the absentee ballot. They watch and monitor when that absentee ballot is sent to this individual. Then they go to their door and they ask them to fill out your ballot, and then they will take it and deliver it for you. That's essentially ballot harvesting. Am I missing anything? No.
I think that's a fair description.
That's a fair description. I don't think there's a ton of that goes on. First of all, I don't know about you, but I'm not handing my ballot to any bozo that comes to my door. So I'm not sure why anybody would do that. That is not proper ethical or legal. So let's hope that doesn't happen. I don't know that there's anything that we can do to monitor that unless a neighbor sees something, say something kind of thing. But for the most part, that is not an appropriate way to vote. So cast your own ballot, put it in the mailbox or put it in a drop box or hand it to your clerk.
Let's have you address this question, Meagan. This is about public funding of elections. Recently, Wisconsin voters adopted a constitutional amendment not allowing private donations to local governments. What's been the effect of that so far? Does everybody understand what the rules are now?
Yeah, so there is still a little bit of work left to be done on this. So now that the constitutional amendment is now in place, there was a request by some local election officials for an attorney general opinion. And recently, the Wisconsin Attorney General did issue an opinion. Now what needs to happen is the commission needs to meet to decide if any additional guidance is needed beyond the opinion for our local election officials to understand how to implement those constitutional amendments. I think, it boils down to, in terms of the questions we were getting from our local election officials, is with the constitutional amendment that says only election officials can conduct election tasks. There's not a definition in state statutes for what constitutes an election task. And so that's where a lot of the questions lie right now. But I do hope that the commission will be able to meet soon to decide whether or not they need to put out any additional guidance or administrative rules that expand upon the Attorney General's opinion. But the Attorney General opinion is available publicly, so you can see what he had to say about the meaning of the constitutional amendments.
Thank you. I have a question here about photo ID. The Wisconsin passed its photo ID law in 2011, I believe, and then we had maybe a decade of litigation, and who knows, maybe we'll get more before too long. Wisconsin likes to have lawsuits over election policies. Paulina, can you tell us how, now that we've had a voter ID law for some time, how smoothly does it work? Are there hiccups with it? Are there people who would otherwise be able to vote who are not? Does it give people more confidence in the voting system that only legitimate voters are casting ballots?
You gave me the technical question.
I did.
Yeah, so obviously at the Milwaukee Election Commission, we follow the law. And if the law says we need voter ID, we are going to do so. And I was not here during the time of the implementation of it, was working in government. And so there was a lot of effort from WEC and our local officials to get the word out about having photo ID for voting. I know with the DMV, state DOT helping us having the IDs available for voters that need it. Voting organizations have gotten more efficient with making sure that that information is available to voters who want to register to vote and getting ready to vote and having that voting plan. So while it definitely had an impact at this point, it's established here in the state of Wisconsin, and so we have to take that law and do what we can to make sure we disseminate that information and make sure voters have their voter ID. And so I think having the DMV available to provide free IDs is a critical component to that. Having guidance about dealing with unhoused citizens who want to vote and how they would get that kind of requirement so that they can vote is really important. And so we do what we can to get that word out, as I mentioned before, and making sure that people aren't turned away for photo ID issues and having problem solved for that. And then, of course, we have provisional balloting too. Like if you forget your ID, you can do a provisional ballot and come back and show that ID. That ballot can count as well. So there are ways to deal with the issue. It's just a matter of making sure that that education is provided to all of the residents for the state of Wisconsin.
Thank you. We have a question here about threats against election officials. We have seen a lot of them in Wisconsin. We've seen a lot of them across the country. Kathy, what is the best way to deter threats and hold people accountable who threaten poll workers, or not just poll workers, but election officials of all stripes? What is I guess, yeah, what's the best way to deter that? The questioner here wants to know if there's anything Rotary members can do to speak out about it or to help prevent that from happening.
Well, I think, and Meagan would be a better source for this question because she took on, as she pointed out, the Wisconsin Election Commission, the 6 members of the commission make the decisions, and then the executive director must carry them out. Similar to the legislature. The legislature makes the laws, the executive branch carries it out, and that's how it is supposed to work. And when she carried out the direction of the election commission, the bipartisan election commission, she got threats. The best thing you can do is notify your law enforcement. And we had several of our community engagement programs. We had law enforcement at our tables. West Bend, we had one. At Chippewa Falls, we had the sheriffs. We also had district attorneys at some of them. And so the district attorneys and the sheriff, we talk about in the enforcement of laws in general, the enforcement of election law. But also, we all deserve to feel safe and protected in our position. That we happen to be doing is carrying out election law as directed by the legislature and the election commission or the municipal clerks and county clerks. And I am sure if you haven't gotten a threat, you probably will. But make sure that you make sure you have open communication with your law enforcement agency and make sure that they're on top of it.
Thank you. Meagan, this is a question about the commission. As you mentioned, it's 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats. And this questioner is asking about, I think this is a question related to the Dropbox guidance, but you could also speak more broadly about it. What happens when there is a 3-3 split?
Yeah, when there's a 3-3 split, then nothing moves ahead. So, there's been a few instances of this in the past where the commission couldn't come to an agreement about what guidance to issue. One example that comes to mind is in 2020, there was a court ruling around our April election where it said that ballots could be counted after Election Day as long as they were postmarked by Election Day. The commission had gotten some reports from clerks that some of the postmarks were ambiguous or missing or other things, and the commission couldn't agree on guidance to put out around that topic. And so they were just silent, essentially, and the clerks had to refer to the court decision or to the law to figure out what to do in those instances. But it doesn't happen often. I do want to say that in the commission's defense and to their credit, it does not happen often. More often than not, they're able to come to unanimous decision. And I think that takes a lot of work on their behalf, a lot of work on the staff's behalf in terms of providing information to them so that they can have those discussions and decide what they want to do in a bipartisan fashion. But if they have a 3-3 vote, then essentially the commission remains silent on the issue and there isn't additional guidance provided, which can be really challenging in our decentralized system because then you have 1,922 local election officials that have to decide how to implement something.
Thank you. And we're running out of time, so this is going to be our last question. I'll go to you, Paulina. We got a lot of great questions. I'm sorry I wasn't able to get to them all. The question is about elected officials who make statements about election integrity that are not entirely accurate or maybe inflame some views on elections that aren't quite right. The questioner is asking, what can citizens do to persuade elected officials to maybe speak more responsibly about elections and that sometimes they themselves are spreading misinformation?
Thank you. Well, one of the things we can do is vote. I thought that was funny. Thank you. Yeah, that's so true. So I think when it comes to people in leadership positions, especially in public service, that perhaps aren't sharing, the truth, I think part of it is giving them the truth, right, and looking for that information, pushing to see, well, why are you saying the things that you do? I mean, I feel very lucky in the sense that here in the city of Milwaukee, my local elected officials, the aldermen and the mayor, have been great supporters of fair, transparent, and accessible elections, and are supportive of the resources that we need, and will continue to do so. So I think part of the issue, again, is the education and the dissemination of truth and facts, and it's just continually fighting that issue. My experience has been when you have a local or state official that may be saying something, give me a call and I'll invite them over to the process. Again, becoming an observer and watching, taking the time, if I have time, to sit them down and happy to answer all of their questions. I mean, the best part of my job is I have nothing to hide. Everything is a transparent process. Everything is tracked. Everything that we do is done with the utmost security to protect democracy and to protect our voters' votes. And so that's the best part of the argument is come on over and watch it. We're here to show you that this is a great system and it's managed in a bipartisan fashion every election.